Our subject today is the opportunities and challenges of short form publishing. I'd just like to take this moment to thank you all for joining us, particularly as I know different time zones and it may be your lunchtime, maybe your late afternoon, but we're grateful and we hope this session will prove really useful for you. So as mentioned a moment ago, my name is Mark Dudgeon. I'm the Senior Publisher for Theatre and Shakespeare Studies here at Bloomsbury. Just before introducing our panel, there's a few housekeeping notes which I probably ought to go through. Just on mics and cameras, these would have been turned off for everyone as you joined, apart from the panel, but please just take a moment to ensure you are muted and your camera is turned off. That enables us just to sort of spotlight the panelists in the first section. We've already drawn attention to the Teams chat function, and we would really like to encourage you to ask questions or to post comments as we go through our session this morning. We'll try to address these at different points of the session, and there will also be an open time for questions and discussion towards the end. You may like to tweet during the session, and I think you may have seen on the holding screen there's a Twitter hashtag that you may choose to use, which is short form publishing, if you wish to live tweet. And I need to just remind you that the event is being recorded and may be circulated both to attendees and online at a later point. We've allowed 90 minutes for this session. It is relatively informal, so obviously feel free to get up, move around, get yourself a drink, come back with a sandwich or whatever. I'm going to introduce our panel now as we make a start. So I'm joined today by Ella Wilson. Ella is assistant editor here at Bloomsbury and who is going to be commissioning into our short form series, which we're going to be hearing more about this session. I'm also joined by three of our authors and series editors. Liam Jarvis, who's a theatre maker and practitioner researcher. He's co-director of the Centre for Theatre Research and senior lecturer in the Department of Literature, Film and Theatre Studies at the University of Essex here in the UK. Karen Savage is a scholar, practitioner researcher, and she's associate professor and the head of School of Fine and Performing Arts at the University of Lincoln in the UK. Together, Liam and Karen have co-edited a book called Avatars, Activism and Post-Digital Performance, Precarious Intermediate Identities. This was published by Methuen Drama in 2021, and the paperback is released at the end of this month on the 29th. The book explores how technology is reshaping performance. It examines the artist as activist and avatar, and how digital models of performance problematize and expand our discussions of identity. Liam and Karen are editors of Methuen Drama's new short-form book series, which we're going to be hearing about today, which is entitled Performance and Digital Cultures. And they're also the co-authors of the first book in the series, which publishes in January next year, and which is entitled Post-Digital Performances of Care, Technology and the Pandemic. Also joining our panel today, delighted to have Patrick Lonergan, Professor of Drama and Theatre Studies at the University of Galway in Ireland. Patrick has written extensively on Irish theatre and performance, has edited collections of plays, is co-editor of Methuen Drama's extensive critical companion series, and is also the author of the short form title, Theatre and Social Media, published in our Theatre and series. So welcome and thank you to all of our panel for what you're going to be sharing with us today. So just as a brief introduction, our workshop, we're going to be looking closely at writing short form publications and seeking to offer guidance, insights and tips to help you in your writing. Our panel will be sharing their experience, reflecting on the distinct opportunities, but also perhaps some of the challenges which the form presents. And as I mentioned at the beginning, towards the end of the session, we will open the floor up for questions and discussion. But if you can't stay for the full 90 minutes, and of course use the chat function, I will try to address questions there as we go along. We're going to have a short section by Ella now, and that's going to set the groundwork for our session today just by defining short form publications for us. So over to Ella.
Ella, I think you're on mute, sorry.
So sorry about that, thank you. Hi, I'm Ella, commissioning into the Performance and Digital Cultures series, and I'm going to talk a bit about what we mean by short form publishing. It seems obvious to say, but although word counts can vary, generally speaking, we are talking about monographs which are longer than an article, but shorter than a conventional full-length book. Bloomsbury short form series include Theatre and, Topics in Musical Theatre, Performance and Digital Cultures, Object Lessons, and 33 1/3. Other examples include Cambridge Elements, Palgrave Pivot, Bristol University Press and Policy Press shorts, Brill mini monographs in literary and cultural studies, IHR shorts, and many others. The major advantage of this form of publishing is speed. Speed of writing, and in some cases publication and dissemination, is a lot faster compared to the average monograph. This means that publications can be especially timely or responsive to recent events compared to the extended periods of research, development and writing typical of a conventional monograph. It also means that they're less of a drain on your time when simultaneously working on a teaching job or another project, as I know the majority of you are or will be. Each press will have different publication timetables, formats and price points for their short form series. The majority publish in both print and digital versions, and some are conceived with a digital first workflow in mind. Everything that we publish gets released on our digital platform Drama Online. As the digital home for our short form publications, Drama Online provides global distribution of your research and at no cost to the students at subscribing institutions. So after that brief definition, I'm going to pass on to Liam and Karen. What appealed to the two of you about short form publishing?
Thanks very much, Ella. So I suppose it's useful just to start maybe with just some context about how Karen and I got into short form publishing, because I suppose the last 2 or 3 years, Karen, you and I have been having an extended critical discussion that's led to the first book in this series. But I suppose in terms of how we made our way, and I appreciate everybody in the room today, you might be coming at this topic having never approached short form writing before. We might also have people in the room who are more experienced, who have produced short form writing but are interested in focusing on the digital. So there could be all sorts of experiences in the room. I guess our gateway into the topic largely came off the back of the pressures of the pandemic, I suppose it's fair to say, and the sort of cultural climate that we're faced with at the moment. So in particular, issues around authors being under pressure around caring responsibilities, which I guess is fairly central to the topic of the first book in the series. Precarity, I suppose, in the industry in terms of people on contracts that might not be research contracts but want to actually develop a research profile, but an 80,000 word monograph might be out of reach. I think also just the pressure of writing within the pandemic or at this particular cultural moment with the cost of living crisis. I think I would have really struggled to produce even a short form monograph without the support of Karen as a co-author and collaborator. So I think also seeing this as this moment of crisis, also as an opportunity to sort of galvanise and develop collaborations, to build networks, to use the book to enter into a conversation with practitioners. So a feature of this new book series is we're inviting key thinkers or practitioners to write the preface, the sort of foreword to the book, to set up as a springboard into a debate or a discussion, which is nerve-wracking because you have no idea what your invited author is going to say on the topic. So it creates an element of uncertainty, which is quite exciting, but really in the spirit of a discussion and a dialogue. But I suppose all of those kinds of pressures added to our interest in the topic of the digital, which is an interesting topic in the sense that I think probably in the decade over which I've been writing and researching this topic, and Karen, I'm sure you'll have some thoughts about this, it's sort of been quite a niche area, the areas of digital theatre, intermedial theatre, and then of course with the pandemic it became a mainstream practice. And I think there was a real opportunity with that to bring some voices into the discussion who might have thought, oh, this topic is is not for me, or it's too niche a topic for my area. So I think something about digital entering into the mainstream, the tensions of digital as well, what we're losing through digital, became really interesting. So I think we wanted to think about a short form series that was accessible, that invited different kinds of voices into the conversation, maybe that haven't been part of these conversations before. And I suppose the pace of change with digital is very accelerated. So I imagine at various institutions, people having conversations about ChatGPT-3 at the moment, and the potential ethical issues and the seismic change that's coming with artificial intelligence, particularly in the course of the next year. So there's some really urgent things to be talking about and discussing. And I think one of the things we were interested in is how can we respond in a timely way, or enable researchers and authors to make a contribution to a live debate that's moving really quickly. So the short form as a way of responding to those kinds of accelerated paces of change, and also as a perhaps what might be a more natural home for practice researchers as well, those people engaged in a practice that might intersect in some way with the digital. But the shorter form, in our case in the series, 35,000 word books, lends itself slightly more accessibly to those people who are critically reflecting on a practice. So really it's sort of in the spirit, I suppose, of trying to open up those possibilities and to provide a gateway for people coming at the digital from really different vantage points, and also different career stages as well. So how we can create a book series that invites early career researchers who are engaging with the digital, but also perhaps people who are senior academics who've never written about the digital before, but off the back of the pandemic have now found kind of clear intersections with their practice. But Karen, that's a lot of me talking. I'll pass over to you and get your thoughts as well.
Oh, thanks, Liam. Hello, everyone. I'm Karen Savage. It's really lovely to have everybody here. And thank you, Liam. That was great. Really great summary. And I share all of those thoughts, really. So maybe I should just focus on a couple of things that so I'd like to just maybe mention some of the anxieties that folks might have around collaborative writing, for one thing, and also around the short form, and particularly for those that are considering issues around the research excellence framework. By the way, the new report came out only yesterday, didn't it, about how we're moving forward with that, so perhaps timely in that regard. So first of all, you're absolutely right. We wanted to be responsive and address themes that perhaps were really fast changing. And at the same time, you think, well, I'm a researcher and I want to, in the UK, I want to be submitted to the REF. So I also need to make sure that this is rigorous and original. And what else am I thinking of? REF people, rigor, originality, and oh my goodness, it's gone from my brain. There you go. I've been thinking too much, REF. Impact. Impact, yeah, so there you go, impactful. But so you're thinking about all of these things that you want to achieve, and you think, well, will the short form be able to do that? Am I going to be able to take a deep dive and also, you know, do everything that I need to do for this book to make sense, and kind of meet all of that criteria as well, and also contribute something that I really want to contribute and something that I really want to say. So I think having a collaborator in that regard is really, really helpful, because I'm not sure what all of your writing styles are like, but sometimes, you know, when you're writing alone, you can take too deep a dive in a certain direction, or you might be someone who takes off, you know, and goes down lots of warrens and rabbit holes, or kind of one thing leads on to another thing, and all of a sudden you're writing 3 different books. So actually having a collaborator to say, yes, Karen, but what's our point here? Or, you know, actually I've had this idea and I think now we should, you know, replace certain things, was really, really helpful. And I really enjoy collaborating with different people for all sorts of reasons. I think we can keep each other to task and say, come on, we've got a deadline to meet, and it's really helpful doing that with somebody else, because then you're not just letting yourself down. And, you know, I think some of us need that. And then, of course, just bouncing those ideas, those things that sometimes you only get to do on those joyous occasions within your own institution when you have a research session, or when you're lucky enough to be able to go to a conference and you can have all of those wonderful conversations. If you've got someone who you're collaborating with, you can have those conversations more often. And I just, I've really enjoyed it. So, thank you, Liam, for being such a solid collaborator of mine over the last few years. And in terms of those who might think, well, how does that work in terms of my contribution? How is that going to be judged? Is it going to be seen as less valuable or, insignificant? Significance, that's the other thing I was meant to say about the ref. So yes, yes, I was meant to say that, but no, it's not insignificant to collaborate with someone else, because actually, as we know, it's not necessarily the total amount of words that you create for an exercise or a research exercise. It's actually what you've got to say. And you can say that either by writing a chapter each, and sometimes that's the easiest way to divvy things up, but that's not always the way either. The book is submitted and in the Research Excellence Framework under Liam and myself. We happen to be at different institutions, but we can both submit the book as a whole. And, that's very possible for anybody else who's collaborating. You can, of course, though, say, well, I specifically, we did divvy up chapters and these chapters are my contribution. It's really kind of quite flexible in the way that you discuss it. And of course, and I'm sorry, I'm speaking very UK based here, those are conversations that you would have with your research team at your institution. But I do want to reassure anyone that co-authoring is not lesser than single authoring. It's a very different process, and one that you've got to kind of get used to, and you won't be able to work with everybody. There are some folks that won't collaborate very well, and then there are going to with as another individual, and then others that is just a really kind of a great ride to go on with that person. So maybe I'll just say a few more things. Have I got time, Mark? I didn't know if you were waving at me for time. Oh, you are. Okay, so what are the kind of things that I think we learned from a co-authorship? I hope that's all right, Liam, if we talk a little bit about that. So in this book in particular, the first in the series, we really wanted to focus sort of through a lens of care, which, to be quite frank, care theory was not something that I'd really explored in detail before. I know Liam had done some more work around care theory, but we also both had very different optics on it. We came with different case studies that we'd experienced, and I think that the breadth of the book kind of shows the influences that we both had during the time of the pandemic. So first of all, we wanted to turn this book around at a point when it was still relevant, because we don't really want to be bringing out something necessarily about the pandemic 5 years from now, because, okay, there might still be some really interesting points in there, but folks might say, oh, not the pandemic again. Or they might say, oh, that pandemic, we've had 3 more since then, touch wood, let's hope not. But you never know, do you? So we wanted it to be quite responsive and reactive to the current environment. But we were also aware that we were situated in 2 different countries at the time for some of this writing process, and we were having very different experiences and being absorbing very different experiences as well, whether that was through our teaching practices that we were doing online with students, whether it was things that we were engaging with through online performances, or reaching out to some of other types of performance, maybe through television series, or looking at some of the later work. We discussed things around the metaverse, for example. We were really keen to make sure that we engaged theoretical ideas and concepts closely with practice, because one of the other issues that we were very well aware of was the strain on practitioners, particularly during this period when many of their spaces were kind of no-go spaces. So we really wanted to try and understand what what it was like, or how things needed to be done differently to navigate through this pandemic. And so the book talks very much about what resilience means, challenging resilience as a word, as a theme, as a concept, and also what that means for practitioners and theory and working with various types of performance spaces. And I think some of that came through to us as well in the ways that we collaborated. We were under our own pressures, so we had to navigate some of that care, I suppose, for the way that we did our own work, which kind of brings me back to thinking about how do you collaborate? For us, it was much around trust and honesty, and also being very realistic about what we could achieve. And then additionally, bringing along the lens of care that we were applying to our book to also apply to each other and the situations that we were going through. At the same time, dare I say it, also being caring by making sure that we were meeting our deadlines. So there was a lot of responsibility around there, but many of the themes of the book I felt kind of really aligned with our writing process as well. So I hope that wasn't too ranty, but yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a few of those points that were particularly important to me in the writing process.
Karen, that was really comprehensive, thank you. I was just thinking there were moments in the writing of this book where it felt like we were headed towards an 80,000 word monograph, and this sort of collaboration, I suppose, working, and it's probably in the nature of something like a pandemic or something that's a force majeure, I suppose, perhaps might not be obvious material for a short form book, because the scale of what you're writing about is it's going to touch virtually every reader in ways that perhaps can't be anticipated, just the impacts of the pandemic. And so I think for us, and feel free to correct me if you don't agree, but finding the loci, the central foci, deciding, I suppose, the ethical responsibility of deciding which case studies and why, when there were so many different examples of case studies we might reflect upon. I suppose also the politics of things like bringing care theory into a conversation with theories that might seem to be unrelated. So, for example, Emmanuel Levinas's idea of ethics of the face-to-face encounter. But I think we were sort of seeing online some of these theoretical ideas being apprehended by anti-mask conspiracy theorists, saying, "Oh, well, this this is supported by Levinas's ideas." And you think, "Hold on, that's interesting that some of these theoretical propositions that are 70 or years old, are actually being used in that way or being apprehended towards different kinds of political agendas." So I suppose the responsibility to intervene and think, actually, can we reclaim Levinas in not an anti-mask or anti-vax discussions, but think about also a theatre that's experiencing a loss of face, when direct face-to-face encounters, except for those that are socially distanced, are almost impossible. And yet other authors, such as Nicholas Rideout in his Theatre and Ethics book, had discussed the possibility for theatre to operate as an ethical space on the basis of Levinasian ethics. Well, then what happens when theatre can't show its face? What happens when theatre is mediated through various different forms of technology? So I suppose the ethical conversations about that, and what is digital care? Is there such a thing as digital care? Does that count? Does the sort of remoteness of the inability to touch, I suppose, others constitute neglect? Does it have to constitute neglect, or can we find ways? And I think that one of the really interesting things was exploring ways that practitioners, both in fields as variable as performance, but also in healthcare, where the arts and well-being were very much intersecting in the context of the pandemic. It was all about care in one sense or another. And maybe also trying to think, is technology something different from care? Or actually, is it all about care, in terms of how these technologies are being used? How I think there was a tension in writing this book between two slightly different forces. One was about the drive towards the digital, and the digital as a stopgap solution to so many of our teaching and performance problems. But then equally, the digital offering a whole set of new problems with, for example, governments in our different international locations that might be wanting to gather data on the public as never before. And I think the important thing about the cultures in the title of the series rather than culture is the interest in an international outlook. So just to expand, Karen, on your points about collaboration, and I think our hope with this series is the digital. One thing the digital does facilitate is this a global reach, I suppose, in terms of collaboration. Patrick, I know this is something that you commented on the other day when we were discussing it, so you might have some additional thoughts about this. But I think the opportunity for digital spaces to open up sustainable ways of engaging and broadening the conversation and understanding. I think from writing this book, as Karen mentioned, we were in lockdown in different countries. So having this different sets of perspectives on, I mean, lockdowns weren't called lockdown, I think, in Spain, were they? Karen, they were called something else. So I think we're really interested in kind of resisting the hegemonic force of the digital and really think about the digital as something really geographically located in very different international locales. So our hope, and so it's really exciting to see participants joining us from various different geographical locations today, especially with the time difference. So thank you so much for those of you that are joining us at inhospitable times of the day. But that's also, I suppose, enshrined in our advisory board, that we've tried to put together an advisory board for the series that encompasses as many different continents as we could to extend the reach of which authors we might be finding. And equally, you might not be interested in contributing to this particular series, but you might know somebody that might be, that we might otherwise not reach. So I think there's something about having this sort of discussion in this kind of forum that might enable us to give access to different kinds of voices that we might not otherwise be reaching. So I think harnessing the digital in that respect, in terms of collaboration.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just to bring, I mean, that, you know, that was another great summary, and I think really helpful, and an invitation, which I'd like to extend as well now through, if there are any questions, but just to realign that, I suppose, a little bit. I mean, we talked about co-authoring, and I mentioned, oh, you could do it by doing different chapters, etc. I think what was really important about this book is we didn't really do that. We took the lead on certain things, but the book was very much about sharing our experiences. And I think that's kind of where, you know, Liam, your last comment there is like, actually, doing this through an online platform now, there could potentially be collaborators who you can work with that are not in the same geographical spaces. And I know that's nothing new, but people do that all the time. But actually, to do something that needs a bit more of a quick turnaround, a bit of an impulsive response to something. And then you mentioned around responsibility as well. Sometimes as academics and scholars, and practitioners, we feel responsible for answering something or for engaging something or presenting. And I think this short form series enables that, because, you know, like you might sit on a monograph, a full monograph for 3, 4, 5 years, depending on the sort of, you know, research time and leave you're given and the process of the book. This can be quicker and it can be enhanced, and the process can feel more supportive, I think, if you co-author. That's not to say everybody should co-author, by the way. It's just we're trying at this point to alleviate any concerns around what co-authorship might bring, and also any concerns that a short form publishing might bring. But I really think we would all welcome if anyone had any questions that with their own particular anxieties that we haven't addressed, then please at any point do just put something in the chat. And also you invited Patrick into the conversation, and I realise I've just spoke again. So Patrick, I don't know if you'd like to respond.
Sorry, I have to unmute myself. Yeah, I just wanted to say it's a really exciting series, and I really look forward to seeing how it develops over time. I think particularly that matter of international collaboration is potentially very exciting. But I can see somebody has a hand up, so I think it might be good to let that person in. Have we got a question?
Hi there. Yeah, so my name's Gareth Osborne. I'm the one who was working across Bristol, Bath and Cardiff universities. So I'm a practice-based researcher in immersive performance, but bringing it into contact with children's publishing. to encourage children's reading and literacy. And yeah, really interesting what you're saying about sort of co-authorship. I myself with 7 practitioners, sculpture, poetry, fiction, and sound artists. We wrote a collaborative article. I know how difficult, but how rewarding that is. And so it was really interesting. So my question was that, you know, my practice, sort of working with children in schools, practice-based, lots of performance, lots of data collection of different kinds. I just wanted to ask that, you know, how this series, Drama Online and Methuen Drama, with this focus on digital cultures, how the form might respond to sort of practice-based research, which needs to kind of show not just text, but also sort of images and video and the children's creative work and that kind of thing. Thank you.
Might the structure of that be a response that Mark or Ella might need to respond to, and then we can speak a little bit around the content?
Yeah, I'm happy to sort of pick up on Drama Online specifically. So Drama Online is a sort of digital publishing platform. Gareth, I don't know whether you have access to it at one of those many institutions already, but you'll be familiar with it. That the books that are published, which are scholarly books, such as the books in this series, are reproduced on the site. So there aren't at present additional resources or materials that are added to the book when it gets released on Drama Online. So the book is reproduced as it is in the print format onto Drama Online. Our print publications can be supported by additional online resources, which may be a whole variety of those things that you've mentioned, and maybe video, maybe audio, it may be PowerPoint, it may be worksheets, additional materials that didn't fit into the book, or just work as ancillary resources. So those can be published on our website. So when a book goes onto Drama Online, it will already contain those links out to our website. So those are retained, so people can, reading the book on Drama Online, they can then link out to the website where those additional resources can be found. I think it's just worth noting that the difference between, I know this isn't the forum specifically to think about the difference between a PhD publication or thesis and a book publication, but is around the issue of permissions for all of that material to be published in that format, to be and to be disseminated and distributed that widely. So it's just ensuring that you have the permissions in place for interviews, for photos, for whatever it may be. But that's speaking about that aspect of it. But I don't know whether there's another part of the question which Liam or Karen want to address about this series specifically, being about practice as research as well, or including that.
Well, I have a few immediate thoughts, and then Liam, do jump in as well. So in the first book that we've created, Gareth, we have a provocation at the front of the book, which is actually by Prototype Theatre, and it's a couple of thousand words, or up to a couple of thousand words, and it's really situating some of our thinking into their practical thinking, or actually sort of the other way around as well. So they've raised some thoughts around being practical theatre makers and raised some questions and some provocations, and we've kind of addressed and responded in a sort of very dialogic way, I think, throughout the book. Now, I'm thinking in terms of practices research that perhaps that dialogue is just kind of more heavily weighted in the opposite direction a little bit. So, just thinking off the top of my head, and of course, all of this needs to go through, all of the proposal stage, and everything else, needs to meet the requirements. But it might be that the provocation is, for want of a better term, quite a purely theoretical approach, and actually a lot of the material that comes after the provocation is around the practical practices research responses to that. And I know that therefore there might be some difficulties with visual imagery or whatever else it is that digital imagery that or even digital artifacts that you wanted to include. But I guess that would be a bit of a conversation about how could that work be evidenced in ways that supported both the publishing process and also what you needed to be able to evidence or demonstrate. But certainly from my perspective as one of the series editors, I'd be really happy to see some of those dialogues flipped between, you know, what we might consider more pure theory and what we might consider more practice. Not that I actually see those two things very distinctively. I understand it's really complicated, but I think, you know, you could really play around with the structure of that from my view. Liam, I don't know, may not have articulated that very well, but happy to have a further chat, Karen.
No, thanks, Karen. I think that's really helpful. And yeah, just to say, Gareth, just to open up the conversation here is ongoing. So if there's conversations, it's quite good timing in the sense that we haven't got any books yet published in this series. We're really at the start, and the first one's coming at the beginning of 2024. So it's a great opportunity to be entering into a discussion really about the kind of things you want to do and about whether the series is a home for that, and if not, whether we can, via our colleagues at Bloomsbury, find another home. But I think, yeah, it's really good timing because it's really early, and the proposal process is a formal beginnings, I suppose, to that discussion with both us and the advisory board, but equally it's absolutely fine to have informal conversations as well beyond this forum. So we'll share our contact details at the end, and if you'd like to pick up on the specifics of your project and talk a bit more, we'd be really happy to do that. Sounds really, really exciting.
Thank you very much, that's really informative.
Gareth, thanks so much for asking the question. Let's bring Patrick in at this point. So Patrick, as we mentioned before, has experience of writing short form. I had to look up, but Theatre and Social Media was published way back in 2015. It sounds like almost a different century ago, pre-pandemic, sort of 80 years ago now. And social media may have moved on a little bit since then. So I actually want to pitch a question to you, Patrick, about that, because we talked about the timeliness and responsiveness of the short form format, that you can write it quicker, it can be disseminated quicker. Could we just think a bit about the challenges that come with that as well in a very fast moving medium, particularly like social media, where things change rapidly, and how one addresses and manages that?
Yeah, I think it's a really vital question, not just for short form publishing, but for the world we live in right now, because the pace of change is so fast with so many things. So, you know, imagine you signed a contract to write a book about epidemics or pandemics in January of 2020, or threats to democracy, you know, a month before Donald Trump was elected. Something like this happened to me. My first monograph was about the fact that Ireland had suddenly become very, very rich, and it was published in 2008, about a month after we had a huge financial crash and weren't rich anymore. So a year later, when the book was being done in paperback, I had to kind of quietly go through it and shift a lot of things that had been in the present tense into the past tense. Ireland is a rich country, becomes Ireland was a rich country. And so, you know, that is the way a lot of things are happening in the world at the moment. But the fact is, we as theatre scholars have a really important contribution to make to the understanding of those fast moving things. We can bring a historical perspective. We can say, you know, there were plays about this 100 years ago, including about pandemics. We can also bring a theoretical perspective to bear on these things as well. We can think about the way in which theatre practitioners have knowledge and have skills that can apply in all sorts of contexts. So we have a contribution to make. Yes, there will always be a need for long form monographs for people to go into detail, but at this time, it's a really good form of writing. The other thing to mention about it is just about that thing about the speed of composition. So as Mark mentioned at the start, I co-edit a different book series, which is the Methuen Drama Critical Companion series with Kevin Wetmore. Now, those books are usually between 80 and 100,000 words in length. Typically, and this is a generalization, that the gap of time from the first conversation to that book appearing for sale in a shop would be somewhere between 3 and 5 years. So again, you know, if you signed a book contract for Threats to Democracy just after Brexit, that book would be out in 2021, 22. So this is really important for a variety of reasons. Again, the speed, but also thinking about the way academic careers work at the moment, especially for those of you who are early career researchers. If you're applying for postdoctoral fellowships, if you're going for, say, you know, a Marie Curie Skłodowska fellowship in the European Union, that's usually 2 or 3 years. And, you know, I've often seen in evaluations of those postdoctoral schemes that people get marked down for being overambitious by trying to write too much. So saying I'm going to write a 40,000 word monograph in 2 or 3 years is credible, it's achievable, it gives you an output. And so much of the way the academic profession is going now is kind of moving things down to that 2 or 3 year format, especially around research funding. Just the last thing I'm going to say, though, is that in a funny way, I mean, it's probably for others to talk about whether the book, theatre and social media retains its relevance now. But in having to write in a short space, I think it forced me to do things that helped with the ongoing relevance of it. So if I was writing 100,000 words, I'd probably have written about specific platforms. I'd written about the history of the thing. I'd have, you know, given much more detailed case studies. And then, you know, 3 years later, TikTok arrives and suddenly it's a very different kind of field. But because it was a short form monograph, I had to think about social media in a very general way. You know, what do all of these platforms have in common? What does it mean to perform on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter? And to be honest, the kind of performances people engaged in the platforms that were very popular in 2015 when the book came out are still the practices that they engage in now. So it's kind of slightly paradoxical, but having to write less has meant, I hope anyway, that the book has become more relevant. So that's really one of the nice things about it. This short form composition, it's a kind of writing that requires you to make a lot of really careful choices about what you take out, what you leave in. And for me anyway, I feel like that's really an interesting part of the thought process and allowing you to really focus on what matters to you most.
Thank you, Patrick. I want to put. Oh, I was going to put a question to Liam and Karen related to that, but I've just seen a question from Sue in the chat. So let me just read that one out. You can possibly all see this. A question about audience. I'm thinking about how I associate the theatre and series as belonging and emanating from practicing artists. They are publications that can exist in a rehearsal space, for example, easy to ask creative practitioners to read and tune into a theory, a way of thinking that may be underpinning a creative process, for example. I wonder if there's a sense who the series belongs to and how, given the diminishment of creative practice in the real world, particularly experimental performance that doesn't have a social justice or social care parallel agenda, this series and future series are locating themselves. I don't know whether, Sue, whether you're referring to this new series from Liam and Karen with that particular question, or was that more about the theatre and series? I think you may be able to unmute yourself if you want to.
Oh, thank you.
Pitch in.
Thank you. I think it's I suppose it's a more general point about sort of location of the academic with practice and how who's it for, you know, and so it's not particularly about the theatre and series, but I'm just aware that I have a particular way of seeing the theatre and series within my work as a creative practitioner, that I have a direct relationship with it, as I say, sort of emanating and being located within creative practice rather than in academia. So which way in it is. And as more and more, there's more and more restriction and problematics about funding and projects that, like I say, which are not just about trying to move forward the boundaries of performance, but have to have these other agendas attached to them. I think there's just something about that I don't know, but about how writing, academic writing, publications is going to or not speak into that changing world of publicly funded contemporary experimental live art performance, as opposed to theatre practice that's located, like I say, in sort of social care or social justice issues. Thank you.
Can I respond? Is that okay, just briefly? Sue, really interesting sets of problems and provocations. I don't know if I have any of the answers as such to those problems, but I suppose just thinking about one of the issues that we've been grappling with the first book in the series is that we've called the series, the title of the series has evolved over time, and now we've landed on performance and digital cultures. But actually a lot of what we're discussing in the book is, I suppose Karen and I are conscious of avoiding the new media tropes, or sort of using, or kind of thinking about I suppose there's a tension around the amount of funding that's coming from various technological companies and platforms, and does this allow us to critique? Does this allow us a space to, and with all practices on the internet, where do we find a space offline to be criticising and to be, so we're entering, I guess this is why we've framed the book as post-digital rather than digital, in the sense that we're trying to post Ed Snowden in particular, and all the revelations and more recent revelations about some of the online platforms, and particularly in relation to things like Facebook and political misinformation and the abuse of these platforms, that what's the responsibility of the book that calls itself digital to actually critique, and to not just be a platform that's advocating for digital practice, but to really be wrestling, I suppose, with these changing cultures, and to recognise the digital as a sort of hegemonic force. And I think the kind of wrestling that you're talking about as well in relation to experimental practice and the pressures on that practice in terms of the support, the resourcing. I suppose in terms of our book series, I'd be really interested to think about whether digital also comes into that. Is the digital providing useful affordances, or actually is it doing the opposite? Is it actually diverting attention away from the kinds of practices that you might be interested in? So I think this kind of tension and this wrestling is really what I'm hoping we're going to be seeing coming from proposals from authors, rather than thinking that we're offering a kind of advertisement for work that is purely digital. I think we're interested in digital in all its dimensions, but equally I think the particular pressures that practitioners are faced with in terms of precarity, not just in terms of sustaining their practice, but finding the time to contribute to a series like this, to find it's a lot of time and effort to develop a short form book as well. So I think something that's self-reflexively engaging with those pressures and problems. And as you say, thinking about who you're writing for, I suppose, is an interesting question. So something like the Theatre and series as a book is reaching audiences in the National Theatre Bookshop. I think as Patrick Lonergan, we sort of had that conversation the other day about the readership and the audiences for different series. I suppose because this series is more of a, I think you mentioned sort of mid-length book in the sense that it's sort of 35,000 words, whereas I can't remember how many words the Theatre and series is. It's 15, yeah. So that's a sort of even shorter form than the series that we're launching. So, and probably will meet a slightly different kind of readership. But I think a space where practitioners can be entering into a dialogue with one another, but also to broaden those conversations to readers that might be interested in practice but not directly engaged with practice as well. So I don't know if that's sort of offering any solution, because I think they're really big and complicated and interesting problems. But I think it's really good I think we're hoping the series is going to provide a space for practitioner, authors and researchers to wrestle with some of those problems in a public, rigorously researched forum in terms of the book. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts in response.
Could I just, I'd add quickly, having worked with Methuen Drama over about roughly 15 years, one of the things I really appreciated is the wide variety of series and publications that are published by Methuen Drama and Bloomsbury now as well. So there's a conversation that can happen with an editor where, you determine who the ideal audience is. And maybe it is that you want it to be in the National Theatre Bookshop in London so that people can read it quickly on their way home from seeing a show. Maybe you want it to be usable in a rehearsal room. But maybe what you really want is for it to be part of a digital database so that it can be part of your reading lists in a university course really quickly. And I think what we would tend to find, you know, as editors in the series is that if it's not a match for one series, there's almost certainly a different series that it is a match for. And so that's what's particularly positive, is that those conversations do become possible and a wide range of options exists.
Yeah, thank you for that, Patrick. And I think the question about audience or readership is critical to any series and any specific proposal. This might be a helpful point to bring Ella in, because Ella's going to be talking a bit about sort of the nuts and bolts of the process of proposing something, what then happens to that proposal, what gets looked at, and what you could expect as an author. I've seen there's a question from Russell. Let's if we can park the question from Russell just for a moment, just to hand over to Ella though, just to think through what that process looks like if you are thinking of putting together a proposal.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So I'm going to speak very briefly about the publishing process and advice for early career researchers or people writing their first book in particular. But hopefully, even for those of you who are more experienced, there might still be something useful in here. So first and foremost, I think we all want to encourage you to reach out with any ideas, even if they're in a really provisional form. Because our role as publishers and as series editors is to support and work with you on developing those ideas. Whether you come to us with just an initial thought or a full proposal, we'll discuss and assess and shape it with you. We sort of provide a sounding board where you can test ideas and reshape the book, explore the shape it might take in light of our advice. For example, we might emphasise the importance of including a diverse range of case studies and international examples. And if it's an edited collection, a similarly diverse range of contributors. And we might assess and give guidance on the book's structure or title, or as we were just discussing, its market and competition and where it sort of sits on our list. If you're an early career researcher, we also tend to highlight the differences between a successful PhD and a successful book, as Mark was mentioning earlier. Whereas your PhD was presented to a board of experts to whom you had to demonstrate your knowledge of the field, you're now recognised as an expert on a chosen subject, and your book will be marketed by us to a much larger audience of researchers from various academic disciplines around the world. The way you write, therefore, matters just as much as what you write about. There are also important structural differences between the two formats, and your writing style should be clearer, more authoritative, and so on. And in your proposal, most importantly, you want to impart why your book matters to your particular reader and market, and be very clear about its new and unique scholarly contribution. That's sort of the most important thing to emphasise. I also thought it might be useful to give you a brief and broad overview of the process pre and post contract. So pre-contract, you would submit your proposal following our set proposal form, which we can disseminate after this, to us or the series editors, either after discussing and developing an idea with us or just with a full proposal straight away. We then read and assess it before sending you initial feedback. In some cases, we might ask for a sample chapter, but that would depend on the proposal in question. We'd read it and we'd sort of assess whether one was necessary. After you've then reworked it, if necessary, based on that feedback, we sort of assess the resubmission, decide whether it's ready to go for peer review. If it is, we arrange that on our end before sending you the anonymised feedback to work on. Assuming the feedback is then positive and recommends publication, once you've incorporated any feedback to our satisfaction, I or Mark take that to our publishing board for approval. If the book we propose is approved, we then proceed to offer and contract. The contract always includes 2 dates, which is the date for draft submission of the entire manuscript and a second date, typically 3 months later, for final submission once the manuscript has been reviewed by an external reader. It is worth bearing in mind as well that authors are responsible for clearing and paying for permissions for images, so it's important to factor that in when you are thinking about that schedule. So a briefer summary post-contract. The amount of time that elapses between contract and submission will depend on you and your desired submission date, so it's important that that is realistic when you include that on the proposal, because that's what the sort of schedule and publication date will be based on. Throughout that period, as you write and work on your book, the series editors and I will be available and should be your first point of contact for any questions over email. I'll be more sort of the person for any logistical, house style or permissions questions, whereas Liam and Karen would be sort of your first point of contact for any questions about the book itself and its shape and its place in the series and any changes you might want to make. I'd also be in touch at set intervals in the run-up to your draft submission to check you're on track, supply any useful documents or reminders, and discuss things like the cover or the copy for the book. It is, I think, not worth going into too much detail for time about the editorial or production process after that draft submission, as this isn't really the platform for that. But if you do have any questions about that, I would be really happy to answer those at the end. In the next section, Mark and the series editors are going to be speaking specifically about the series Performance and Digital Cultures, which I handle and commission into. So over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Ella. So that, we wanted to make this session broadly about short form publishing, some of the opportunities and the challenges which it presents, but obviously with Liam and Karen as series editors and their first book now in production to publish in January, it is also very much with a view to hoping that from our audience today and from your peers and colleagues, it will be an invitation too for you to consider proposing work for this. So Ella's usefully put up the slide there, just a bit of a sort of snapshot on that slide about the series. It's, as we said, it's a series of short books of between 30 and 40,000 words, so it may be short form, maybe sort of almost mid-length form. I'll leave you to decide. But it's designed to offer timely interventions in scholarship on the technologization of performance in accelerating post-internet cultures. We've said it will feature critical investigations from researchers, established scholars, and emergent new voices, all contributing to the field of intermediate and post-digital performance analysis. We've mentioned too earlier that books feature an opening provocation, which will be of up to around 2,000 words offered by key thinkers or performance makers. So we've got names of our advisory boards there, and we're very grateful to each of them for the expertise and different perspectives they bring in. And Russell, who has put a question in the chat very helpfully, which I think, I'll ask Liam and Karen to speak to, but maybe there's something Russell can reflect on as well. So just going back up in the chat to find Russell's question, where he says, please can you define for us what you're thinking of with digital? Is it in performance, outside of performance, or both?
Hi, Russell. Thanks very much for the question. Just to respond to the question in the chat, and feel free to chip in as well in terms of switching your mic on. But I suppose, sure. Yeah, really good question. And I suppose in terms of performance as well, might be a question about what do we mean by that, particularly in relation to the first book. I suppose coming off the back of the pandemic, we've been thinking about performance in a sort of expanded sense to encompass transmediated performances online mid-pandemic. I suppose what we've been wrestling with in the first book in relation to definitions and understanding of the digital is the relationship between digital and care. So going back to the origins of the word digital, which has connections to digitus and the hand and the fingers and touching, and care in relation to touch. So that's sort of been our route into thinking about the role of the digital. But I suppose, and Karen, feel free also to sort of share your views in response to that question. But I think it can be all of those things depending on the particular topic, and because we're also recognising that that authors are going to be coming from various different places in terms of their engagement with this topic as practitioners engaging with the digital maybe for the first time in their practice and wanting to reflect on the experience of that. Perhaps practitioners who've been engaging for a longer period of time with the digital, but then the pandemic might have changed or disrupted some of those practices or altered them in interesting ways. Scholarship equally reflecting from different geographical vantage points on what the digital might mean in different geographical contexts or different cultural contexts as well. So I guess pluralizing this idea of the digital in response to authors coming from different geographical locations and different kind of entry points into the discussion around the digital. So I think there's quite a few options of how to approach it, and certainly performance inside the digital. I suppose a lot of also what we're talking about in relation to performance in the first book is performance in the digital, but then also the digital performance of the everyday spread across digital platforms as well, in the shape of memes and in the shape of so how political discourse and political optics was influencing notions around resilience and care, and then in turn how artists were responding to particularly to the responsibilization of individuals for resilience mid-pandemic in different geographical locations. So I guess just with the first book, that's where we've been coming from. Karen, I don't know if you had any thoughts in response.
No, I mean, thanks, Liam. And to add, I think we really wrestled initially as well, whether we were talking about digital, post-digital, what did we mean? And then especially when we started bringing in this series around post-internet as well, and thinking about everything that happened, you know, after the internet, not just on the internet, and, you know, how we relate all of those kind of post anything. So, you know, we really talked about all the convergent cultures, I suppose, of things that were online, things that were live. So I think, again, that wrestling that we talked about in response to Sue's question earlier, I think that authors are able to provoke or, you know, suggest their own wrestling around the words digital and post-digital, internet, post-internet, and how that kind of, how they converge and how they interrelate. I think it would be quite dangerous to say we are only thinking that digital or post-digital means this, or, you know, or doesn't mean that, because actually what we have acknowledged, not to make it all too slippery and just say it's everything, but what we have acknowledged is that whilst things are quickly changing as well, so does the terminology shift in the way that you talk about things. And as some of you might know, Liam and I, you know, originally started all our conversations around ideas of intermediality. So, you know, we've already sort of shifted our thinking from intermediality, which perhaps prior to that people were thinking about multimedia and interdisciplinarity. Then we spent several years, and we still do work within intermediality, but started recognizing some of the things we wanted to talk about were more around what we would call post-digital in that regard. And then, of course, we have the series which is about post-internet. So, you know, there are, I appreciate, quite unwieldy terms that could be unwieldy, and I think that's why that wrestling or those provocations can be put forward by other authors too, and you know, not to just say that it needs to be about one thing or another. Hope that hasn't confused things too much. Also,
Thanks,
though,
just say thank you so much for that. Just out of interest, the translation of intermediality is intermedia city on the transcript below. So when you say intermediality, it actually is intermedia city, which is kind of ironic.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, thank you for that. It is a broad topic. I mean, I think from an Australian perspective, for us, it's very much the post-pandemic. So you are seeing people just coming out and wanting to go to have that live experience. So theatre, it's actually, that's an interesting subject in itself. Yeah, has there been a renewed interest for live theatre because of the pandemic that people weren't able to attend? Yeah, and clearly the digital is both inside and outside. I suppose from my point of view, and the email I sent you is that I think the historical stuff around use of media in performance is still very important, because we are seeing here in Australia it being used again in the ways that it was used previously. And even though I might have thought the liveness debate was over, I don't think it is actually, because new people come along and play with technologies, and we still have the same, some of those same questions are still there.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the pandemic, because I think Liam won't mind me sharing that when we started this book, it was it was situated mid-pandemic, and then we talked about it being post-pandemic, and then the pandemic sort of came back again, and we were like, right, we just cannot put anything before pandemic because we don't know if we're in it, out of it, back in it. So it was just pandemic.
I think there's something which. Sorry, after you.
Just going to say that your thing of resilience, I think, is very apt, because I think that's we probably all know that there's a big kind of a growing awareness of the questions of resilience for practitioners, just the nature of practice and the precariousness of employment, the nature of live performance as well. So yeah, that's a very resonant term these days.
Russ, I think that's really interesting. One of the things that we were interested in our kind of grappling in the first book was also with this mass migration of live performance online, what was happening to the spaces that were more invisible, that were left behind in terms of the adaptation into Nightingale courts, particularly in the UK, but in other destinations, and what are the ethics of that in relation to care, that these sort of theatre spaces are now being used as spaces of kind of criminal judgments, which communities are being adversely affected by that. And I think generally this framing that we were seeing of the pandemic as a digital pandemic, and thinking, well, what does it mean to frame the pandemic as digital, and in what senses was it digital, but also who does the digital leave behind? Who does the framing of the pandemic as digital exclude, when maybe a third of the global population are not online? So I think it's really interesting to think about digital cultures in that widened sense, and thinking about the overlooked areas that might not on the surface look like a digital practice, but are responsive or are adjacent to, or developing alongside these trends in the context of the pandemic, things moving entirely online, but what that meant, I suppose, for those practitioners who perhaps didn't choose to engage, or where's the space to opt out, I suppose, of those approaches to working. So I think there's lots of opportunities to find those areas that might not immediately signal digitalness in how they present themselves in terms of the aesthetics, but might open up some really interesting ethical questions about digital cultures. So I think there's really interesting.
Yeah, I just think for everybody, because I'm on the editorial board, for those kindly listening, I think it also applies to teaching and learning as well, because we've all had our classes going to Zoom, and having students present work on Zoom is quite interesting. But then you have the question about theatre as a face-to-face, traditionally face-to-face, but suddenly you're teaching online. Now we're coming back post-pandemic. What does that all mean in terms of, what is the nature of teaching theatre? Is it a face-to-face thing, or is it other alternatives now? I'll shut up now.
Thanks, Russell. It's really interesting.
Thank you, Russell. We're just before 1 o'clock, so we have 15 minutes remaining. Just before we open the floor up and invite people to share their experience of writing, if they've written short form, or their thoughts about what's been shared. I think it's helpful just to have a brief look at some of the sort of potential topics which Liam and Karen have identified. This is a shortened version of a much longer list we ought to add, and we thought it wouldn't be totally visible on the screen if we included all of the potential topics. But as with any series, we're keen to see this grow quite rapidly as people sort of propose or sort of suggest ideas and topics for it. So we've got a sort of something of a list there, but I don't know whether Karen and Liam, we've said something about which has been helpful for me, and I'm sure for Ella as well. Think about what the series does cover, which may not always look like it's digital as well. So I found that very helpful in this discussion. Think, what does digital exclude, and what therefore is still of relevance to the series here, if it's going to encompass those exclusions as well. So just want to talk a bit about some of your thoughts here as the directions you see the series going, and what you're keen to see being added to it.
So maybe just to begin with a caveat and to say that our imagination takes us so far, but I'm really suspecting that there may well be authors in the room today that have ideas that we just haven't considered, or that might be currently invisible to us. So just to really urge prospective authors not to see these potential topics as any sort of restraint on the possibilities. I think these are just to try and open up a discussion. So please come with suggestions that depart from some of these areas. But I think we were trying to, I suppose, Karen, you and I were sort of wrestling with, as Mark was saying, there might be topics that seem quite timely and obvious. There might be topics that sit adjacent to the digital but are operating in response to. There might be titles that are speaking very particularly to a platform. So I think one of the things we excluded from this list, but we were still thinking about, is, theatre and Minecraft, performance happening on specific platforms might be a particular area of interest. Or I think our inclusion of situated intermedialities was very much thinking about the international and global reach of the series, to think about how intermediality is evolving post-pandemic, actually, in the way Russell was talking about, but in very different global contexts. So how do we tether the digital to specific performance practices that might be happening in different kind of global regions, to open that up as a conversation? Or conversations about data. I suppose quantified self is a topic that could probably be subdivided into 20 further topics, I think, that particular title. But there's this idea of thinking about the relationship, our shifting relationship, I suppose, between our data doubles, I suppose, and ourselves, and how that manifests in performance of different kinds, and misinformation, and I suppose the sort of political urgency, coming back to this question of why short form writing and the timeliness of being able to publish quickly. I suppose being able to respond to manipulations of the digital, the various sorts of political means, and the propagandizing, I suppose, of digital culture, and how artists and performance practices are countering and responding to those things. This might actually also come back, Sue, to you, to the point that you raised earlier about the marginalization of artists, that who is getting their hands on these platforms and technologies, and why, and what are the politics of that? What technologies do we really need to be putting into the hands of artists to wrestle with, and to kind of in terms of the ethics and in terms of the development? I suppose I'm thinking particularly about things like artificial intelligence, but various other practices, and I guess practices that maybe aren't conventionally understood as theatre practices as well. This is why I suppose we've selected the word performance rather than theatre, is to not delimit the kinds of practices that might be discussed. I think we opened the book, our first book, with a meme of a political scientist who was appearing on a CNN interview to challenge a climate change denier that Donald Trump had appointed to their government. And they took a photograph of what their room looked like. So when the CNN frame on the news, they were sort of from the waist up, they were sort of suited and booted, and then but what you couldn't see, the backstage area, if you will, of that domestic space with children's toys kind of scattered all over the floor, and a laptop piled up on various bits of furniture to get it the right height for Zoom, which is a little bit like what I'm doing now, although you can't see it. But I suppose just trying to make visible the kind of backstage reality, so therefore kind of coming almost more from a performance studies angle at the performance of the everyday, and thinking about how we've been performing ourselves online. Karen, I don't know if you have any responses to topics, potential topics.
Sure, I'll just pick up on what you said there. So, I mean, some of these things that we've listed are actually also coming from some of the things that we touched on in this book, and also in our avatars book that we wrote previously. But actually, we didn't base the whole book isn't about, for example, digital clones, but it's something that we felt could be really expanded upon and would have a moment that could be discussed, you know, much more fully than we were able to, because we were using it maybe just as a case study in a chapter. And I also think there's a lot of opportunities for interdisciplinarity in these subjects as too. So, you know, actually, if you are going back to the co-authorship idea, you could potentially co-author across disciplines. And, you know, or if you're single authoring, you can expand your knowledge of performance. As we know, performance theatre studies is really interdisciplinary. You know, we can work and speak different languages with other people. With social sciences we can connect to, etc., etc. And so I think some of the things like automation are in there because they do bridge maybe some of the things between theatre and performance, and then maybe things around engineering as well, and health, for example. So I think there are opportunities for it all to be much more interdisciplinary if that's what you'd like to do.
Thank you, Karen. We've got a bit of time left. I'm conscious people have joined us for a long time. Very grateful for sticking with us. If there are questions which you feel haven't been addressed, please either put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and turn your camera on, I think. But we're keen that if you have a burning question or a comment or a response to anything you've heard, that you have an opportunity before we close at 1:15 just to raise that. So please feel free to do that now. Questions from Catherine. Is there a Bloomsbury webpage on short form monographs listing the different subject areas and or series? We can share links to the different series that Bloomsbury has, which are distinct, sort of separate parts of our website rather than being collected under one section. The ones that we'll be able to share today are the ones specific to theatre and performance, but there are one or two others as well, which can probably be put in the chat as well. And I think we've got on the screen there contact details. So would encourage anyone, make a note of those, please. Ella's your point of contact if considering testing out ideas or wanting further information about the sort of submitting a proposal. But of course, Liam and Karen, are your touch base with them, follow up with them, just to ask questions about, if you're thinking about a particular subject that you may wish to sort of see if that's going to be something that works for the series. Please just drop them a line, and contact details are on the slide, and I think the slide's also probably being shared so that you have contact details in the chat as well. We'll just keep an eye on the chat to see if any further questions do pop up in there. But yeah, contact details will be added in the chat if you're unable to see the slides which are being posted.
I suppose, Mark, you mentioned at the start as well that you're going to be at IFTR in Ghana in July. I'm sure people who might have joined us a bit later will be glad to hear that too. Yeah,
thank you for that reminder, Patrick. Not that I'm going, I hadn't forgotten that, but I think we have a slide of forthcoming conferences where if you're attending in person, yeah, I'll be at IFTR. I think, Patrick, you are too. I didn't get there till the Tuesday, so I missed the first couple of days. But I'll be there, so please do sort of come to what's going to be a rather small exhibit that we have because of the difficulties of shipping things that far. But a colleague, Dom O'Hanlon, who's publisher of our plays and musical theatre studies, he's going to be at ATHA in Austin in the States between the 3rd and 6th of August. And Dom is the publisher of a short form series on topics in musical theatre. We had one of the covers of one of those titles displayed a bit earlier in our session. And yes, Ella is attending part of TAPRA alongside Anna Brewer, who's our publisher for performance and practice. That's in Leeds. So I think those are those are forthcoming conferences. We hope some of you may be able to attend and meet us in person. But if you're not able to do that, please reach out, drop us a line. Part of the purpose of today is to encourage that sort of dialogue with us, particularly as we've at the outset of this series as well, keen to see your suggestions, your provocations shape the direction it goes in and the titles which feature in it. So we'll be very grateful for that contribution from all of you.
Just to add, I'm going to be in the New Technologies Working Group at TAPRA in Leeds, but I'll generally be around for the 3 days. So if anyone would like to meet to talk about the series or just have a coffee and talk about and exchange ideas on short form writing, please do get in touch or come and speak to me. That would be useful.
Thanks, Liam. Good question from Carrie, which is pretty key here as well. Are authors expected to hold a PhD? Good question, Carrie. Thank you.
I think the short answer is no, I think, but actually, I don't know if the publisher, actually, from your perspective, Mark and Ella, do you have any requirements, I suppose, around that from your perspective?
It is a good question. It's not fundamental to a work being published in a short form series, which is going to have a fairly diverse readership. We would typically look for prior publications as sort of testimony to you having been through that peer review process in the past and had something published, and that may be a journal article, journal articles, and maybe a chapter in an edited volume. So I think, reach out, get in touch, share your experience, share your thoughts with us, and we'll enjoy having that dialogue. And do you need to be institutionally affiliated? Certainly not, no.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just to expand on my question here, because I'm thinking, as you've said before, that there is a strong focus or a possibility also for practice researchers to be involved, and also thinking in terms of collaborative authorship, that actually maybe there is a collaboration purely with artists rather than with academics. So this is really good to know. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you, Carrie.
Just to piggyback off the back of that and say, yeah, I think that's absolutely a possibility. I think it could be a really exciting way of those sorts of collaborations, those people who understand the peer review process. So we're setting people up to succeed, I suppose, within the rigours of that process, but equally to enable the other voices and other sets of collaborations into those discussions. That's another really exciting possibility, actually, about short form writing that I don't think we've covered before. So yeah, thanks, Carrie. It's really interesting.
Any other last questions? Please don't be shy or leave feeling that your thoughts or questions haven't been addressed. Got 1 or 2 minutes left. And if this has been helpful, we'd love to hear too. Just as we sort of plan to do future ones of these, Ella and I are speaking at Central School of Speech and Drama next week. Although it's going to be online, it's not going to be present. So we're doing a sort of couple of hour presentation at that institution. It's not the sort of thing we can do every single week, otherwise we wouldn't get much else done, but we would be delighted to, if you feel your institution would benefit, or perhaps a working group, collection of scholars that you're associated with and practitioners as well would welcome an opportunity to have to host something like this, where we guide you through some of the process. We'd be delighted to do that.
Just to add then from my perspective, and maybe my colleagues join me, is if anyone here has something that they just want to ask, even if it's very informal, if it's to share a bit of an anxiety about something, or to just say, look, how did this work for you? Did something go wrong and then did you have to resolve it, or anything like that? Whatever's on your mind, if it's just a thought, then please just email me, and I'm sure Liam will also be happy to do that, and I'm sure Patrick will too, but I don't want to say everyone's happy, but yeah, I'm sure they are.
Thank you, Karen. Well, we're at 14 minutes past according to my laptop, so I don't want to take up more of everyone's time. Just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who's attended our event today. It was only advertised probably about 10 days ago. We should have allowed about 3 more weeks, but as a sort of little disclosure, we're waiting on the cover of Liam and Karen's book to be finalized to then be able to sort of launch this event. So that's sometimes behind the scenes, that's what's happening before something like this even gets promoted. So thank you so much for attending. Thank you to all those who shared in the comments or who've put their mics on and shared in that way. And huge thanks to Liam, Karen and Patrick for giving up their time and for sharing their insights and expertise today. Delighted to have been able to host this event. Thank you, Ella. And in the background, we've had Vivian Quick, our marketing manager, who's been helping to run things and keep an eye on the chat and make sure the technology works. So thank you to everybody. We hope this will be the beginning of an ongoing dialogue. You'll be reaching out to us over email, in conferences and the like. So thank you to everybody. And I'd like to say goodbye for now and look forward to our ongoing dialogue. Thanks very much.